Welcome, everyone.
Hello, everybody. People are starting to filter in. Good to see some familiar names.
Yeah,
and some new names.
Thanks for spending a Friday afternoon, evening, morning, Saturday
morning.
I don't know.
Is anyone in Asia or Australia and it's like Saturday morning?
It's Saturday, they're out doing weekend things. Or not.
Or not. Feel free to say hi in the chat, post your name and where you're from, where you're calling in from if you want to. I mean, I guess we have your name, but you know, you can throw in whatever you want. Post your socials if you want. How's that? Share your socials. Let's connect. Your LinkedIn. Ooh, we've got Chris from London. Hello. It's getting pretty late there, but not too bad, right?
Was it 10 hours or 8 hours? I always forget. From Pacific time.
Yeah, it's 10, I believe.
10.
Duncan is here from Austin, Texas. Is it warm there?
It's really pleasant here.
Okay.
I'm gonna get thunderstorm tonight, which is always good.
Nice.
I am in the middle of Wisconsin, also known as Menominee tribe land, I learned recently. All right. I think we should get started. I always like to reward the punctual and not wait too long for the tardy. We are recording this so they can catch up if they miss anything later. So yeah, I'll just dive in, or actually, Mark, do you want to do the same thing we did on Wednesday's event and have you give a little intro about climate designers, and then I'll set context for what we're doing, and then throw to Duncan?
Yeah, so again, thanks for joining us. Sarah and I, we run a creative studio called The Determined, and we created Climate Designers as kind of a project without a client, right? Where we felt that there was an opportunity for us to amplify, highlight the amazing work of designers working on a climate crisis, as well as just a selfish reason to build out our collective. This is how we work with clients. We actually tap into our collective of individuals, creative folks, climate experts. And yeah, we launched this idea back in October of last year with a simple idea of like, hey, let's just see if this works. It was a one-page Squarespace website with an email sign-up box. And we gave ourselves about a month if this idea was going to be sticky or not. And sure enough, it was. And we've evolved since. And what you see now on the website is what we're up to. And one of the main reasons why we created Climate Designers is that we feel like designers are a special group. We have an amazing skill set to be able to collaborate with people who are doing the hard work on the front lines of climate change, where we can translate their ideas, visualize their complex thoughts and processes and solutions, and ask good questions and use our creative process and all the skills that we've learned on the job and in school to help those succeed in the work that they're doing. And so this is the point of Climate Designers. We're offering opportunities and resources and events and connections and a community to you all so that we can support one another, so that we can then turn around and support those that are doing the hard work, taking on our climate crisis. So if you have any questions, if you're new to the community, feel free to shoot me an email. Happy to chat with you all. And I guess that's it, Sarah. So I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, so throughout this discussion, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to throw them in the chat and we will get to them shortly. And I'll call out people who have questions. And if you want to, I'll invite you up on the stage. Is this a stage? If you want to open your video camera and mic and ask the question yourself, otherwise you can just say, no, I'm good. And you can be an introvert. I totally get it. And I can just read it for you. And then we can have the Q&A that way. But just real quickly, what we're doing here today, I'm super excited to be here with Duncan Meisel of Clean Creatives. And I'll just tell you a little bit about how we got into this thing. It all started with that New Yorker article that Bill McKibben wrote called When Creatives Turn Destructive, Image Makers and the Climate Crisis. And the link to that is in the event that you all RSVP'd on. He's basically calling out the creative industry for being accomplices in helping the fossil fuel industry basically greenwash what they're doing and create social license for them to operate. Basically, for decades, the fossil fuel industry has been kind of brainwashing the American public that fossil fuels are good, there's nothing wrong going on here, and they've been keeping up with the zeitgeist of what people think. And as the opinion has changed towards, oh, climate change is actually real and it can't be denied anymore, they've changed their narrative as well. And it's always PR people and ad campaign people and creatives, a lot of us who work in that industry, who help them do that. And so Clean Creatives is about empowering us all to say, we're not going to be a part of that anymore. You guys will have to figure it out without us, and hopefully without any creative people to power that initiative. The fossil fuel industry can no longer operate with the social license of like, hey, we're not doing anything wrong here, because that's really what it's all about. And we need to get off of fossil fuels for our energy production and turn all the way over to renewables. And there's a lot of work to do there. There's a lot that needs to be done. There's a lot of money in doing that if we can just loosen fossil fuel industry's grip on our culture and our politicians and our policies and everything. So I think that's just a really interesting call out from Bill McKibben. And he mentioned the Clean Creatives campaign, and that's how I figured out about it. I reached out to them on Twitter, and a few emails transpired. And before we knew it, here we are with Duncan, who is the campaign manager, I believe, founder of the Clean Creatives campaign. And I will turn it over to Duncan to just tell us a little bit about your background, where you come from, how you got into this, and what the Clean Creatives campaign is doing. I'm so excited.
Thank you so much. I really do want to thank Sarah and Mark for making this space and just for generally building the community that the Climate Designers Project is. I mean, it really is a fantastic way to build a real discipline and just a body of thinking about what needs to be done here that I think is so cool. And I am very grateful to have the chance to connect with you all, because I think what's happening in this community is really complementary to what we're trying to accomplish. And I just see so much synergy and so much connection here that is worth exploring. So yeah, special thanks to Sarah and Mark. My background is in running campaigns for environmental and progressive nonprofits. I worked with Bill McKibben at 350.org from about 2011 to 2017. And we were doing things like launching the fossil fuel divestment movement and fighting the Keystone Pipeline and rallying people to the People's Climate March and the Paris climate talks and things like that. And I really think that background is relevant to this, because the reality is that every time we tried to get something done, there was a deluge of PR and advertising money directed at us and the work we were doing to stop it from happening. And that one of the biggest barriers we always faced was that the other people we were trying to target or that we were sort of going up against had this massive operation that they were able to call upon to essentially oppose our priorities to oppose our priorities in a way that wasn't in line with science, wasn't in line with what the world needed to be accomplishing. And it's a bummer. It really sucks. And so after 2017, I've been doing work for different candidates and campaigns, and I reconnected with one of 350.org's co-founders, Jamie Henn, who's running a nonprofit media lab called Fossil Free Media. And we were kind of figuring out what to do. My background is in digital campaigning. And we started to see these ads that were coming out during the election season from the American Petroleum Institute that were, a little corny, maybe not top-notch creative, but with enough money and talent, could be really powerful. And we started saying, like, I wonder who made this, and started really to ask those questions about where those things were coming from, with the idea of maybe just kind of doing a one-off, being like, you made this API ad, that's really bad. We need to have, climate action. But then when you sort of start to scratch the surface of the connection between some of the bigger creative firms and fossil fuel industry, you realize how powerful it is and how influential it can be. And that kind of led us down the road of wanting to create a bigger community, a bigger campaign, which became Clean Creatives. And we reached back out to Bill, who wrote his article for the New Yorker. I really resonate with what Sarah and Mark were saying about how the Climate Designers Project started out, which is like, okay, we'll make a Squarespace site and then see what happens. And that's very much the place we're at. The reason I'm excited about this is not just because I think the community of climate designers is so fantastic, but also because we're learning a lot about how this can grow and how effective we can be. And I think I want to say that because I'm very interested in your feedback just about how to make this better. And that if you have questions or doubts or things like that, that is equally as important as excitement or interest. So really very much want to be an open book. The only thing I want to just sort of add besides that background is to say that today we actually happen to have released a report that we've been working on for a long time with a group called the Climate Investigation Center, which are the people who know where all the PR and sort of front group bodies are buried. They're just like extreme experts in tracking down all the connections between front groups and fossil fuel money. And through a combination of like digging up tax records, digging through industry publications, and or just outright leaks, they've sort of put together a really important picture of what the creative industry is doing in collaboration with fossil fuels. And so that report is actually available on our site starting today, which is very exciting. I'm excited about it.
Breaking news.
Creatives.org/learn is where you can get that. And I just want to point out a few just like, big numbers from that I think is just helpful to kind of set up a conversation. The first thing that we did is we just tried to get a picture of like how much money this is, and looking at tax records and some other academic research between 2014 and 2018, a 5-year period, fossil fuel companies spend about $1 billion on advertising and public relations. So 200 million a year. And the impact of that is, from what we can tell, that's about a 400-to-1 ratio sort of versus the amount that renewable energy industries are able to spend. So it's a big, there we go. Thank you, Sarah. So it's a lot of the work that fossil fuel and the PR companies they work with, they approach us in the context of like, we're trying to create balance in the public debate. We want to make sure that our side is fairly represented. And what we're seeing is actually that it's overwhelming, and it's actually has distorted the public debate in a way that's really profound and made it very hard for renewable energy industries to grow. And the reason it's hard is because this money is not directed at consumers, it's actually directed at decision makers. So like I was talking about with 350, it's not that people are seeing these ads and they're so excited to go to the pump. It's that politicians see this ad and they say, we can't do anything about this because we're going to face a deluge of disinformation, misinformation, and more. And then the other thing we did is, most of the financial relationships between agencies and fossil fuel companies are usually kept secret, but through various places, awards and leaks and some press, we're able to kind of sort of start to paint a picture of what agencies have what relationships with what companies. And this is a table that sort of describes some of the worst actors. Actually, you see there in the pink there that Fleischmann-Hillard has all these different relationships. Apparently, they said today that they no longer have those relationships with those companies. So who knows if that's actually true, but whether or not it is, I think the fact that they're going out of their way to say that sort of indicates that these are not the relationships that they're proud of. These are not the contracts that they're like going out of their way to say, yes, we're doing. And just on a personal note, you see GSD&M there. They're huge here in Austin, and You will not see the American Petroleum Institute on their website, but they're taking at least $26 million a year from them. And it's just not, it's not the work that they're proud of. And I think that says a lot about the trajectory of the industry and the kinds of relationships we're dealing with here. So that's the big picture of like where we're at and what we're doing, and just this interesting piece of like set of data that happened to come out today. But I'm really interested in having a pretty free-flowing conversation, I hope, just about like what this work is and your questions, your concerns, and genuinely, I am interested in hearing feedback or doubts. Is really welcome too. So yeah, thank you so much, Sarah and Mark, again, and I'm looking forward to talking to everybody.
Amazing. Thank you for that. I just feel really lucky that you're here, and I'm super grateful for all of that investigative work that's already been done and that we can make this available to our community. It's just awesome. And yeah, I think that's part of what we're all about in this community, is sharing information and resources so we don't have to start from scratch each time. I don't even know how I would start to try and find this information. I want to start the Q&A. I'll let everybody know if you have questions, just to throw them in the chat and we'll try and get to everyone. I just wanted to know if you've talked to any of these creative agencies and had any discussions about this with them. What are some themes that have come up, or concerns and doubts that people have brought up to you already?
Yeah, so it's not necessarily opening the line just yet, I would say. When Bill released his article in the New Yorker, Porter Novelli, which is a large legacy PR ad firm, they were in charge of the Truth campaign for tobacco way back when, trying to beat the tobacco industry. They dropped their contract with the American Public Gas Association. And I think that the conversations we're having is, there's a lot of questions about the future of this. And I think people are feeling the pressure from mass movements around climate change is becoming really compelling. And the way that we want to work is actually not putting this all on creatives. The campaign is called Clean Creatives because it's a snappy name. But in reality, like, this is actually going to take a community effort that's a combination of work from clients who say that they don't want to share work with the agencies that work for fossil fuels. And we've had a couple of people step forward and say that, and we actually know of one or two that are going to make more public announcements about that. It's executives starting to see that their relationships are no longer tenable. We want to put pressure directly on the people who are cutting the checks, so to speak. And then we think that a community of creatives can have a lot of influence, that it can be, it probably won't be a series of individuals standing up, but we want to create a platform where a large number of people can stand up and say, like, this is the norm for our community now. Like, we're actually not doing this, and we're not doing it together. Because it is competitive. A lot of people will do work on contract or are freelancers, and it's hard. It's hard to say no when there's a lot of precarity built into the business model. So I think what we're trying to do is build a community, build connection, build solidarity. And I think that's the thing that's going to be influential as much as anything else. And I think it's going to be a top-down and a bottom-up process. Like, we're going to try and have as many conversations as we can with executives and people who are cutting the checks, as I said. And I think we have a pretty compelling case for them. But I think the bottom-up pressure, I think, is going to be really compelling too, and will send a message that this is just not the norm of how we work anymore.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting if we get to a point where, I don't know, like, you're starting to call out agencies and saying, hey, this agency is doing this kind of work and this is no longer acceptable. And all of a sudden, agencies have always been sort of the behind the scenes. They don't really put their logo on their work. You usually don't know exactly who did it unless you're in the industry and you're looking at the trade publications or looking at their portfolio. But just as like the general masses, they don't really even think about the fact that there's an agency of creatives behind this. It's just like an Exxon ad,
Yeah.
And so this is a really interesting pivot point in the conversation where we're starting to ask people to take responsibility for their part in this. And in doing so, hopefully change the industry of where we get our energy and what we find acceptable as a society.
And I was guilty of that. I always thought, well, Exxon's running an ad about this, or the American Petroleum Institute is running an ad. It's like, no, actually, someone sat down with them and they worked through the creative and decided what to shoot, and then they went and shot it and they hired the actors and There's a lot of pieces there, and I really I try, at least my goal here is actually to call in agencies. Like there is I think the reason that this is important and this is compelling is that the people who work on these projects are influential, that they're persuasive, that they're good at their jobs. And you can make a case that there was a point in time where like working for an oil company was like, okay, maybe not the first thing on your list, but like wasn't morally objectionable, right? You didn't know, there wasn't public discourse about it. That's not now. That's not 2020, it's not 2021. And I think that people done past work with these industries, and people do a lot of things to get where they are. And what we're aiming towards here is not guilt or shame, but really like a collective shift away. That like the future of the industry doesn't lie with fossil fuels and the money there. Because, if you look at what big consumer brands want, and the way that they're developing their marketing programs, it's moving more and more towards cause marketing. It's moving more and more towards putting sustainability at the center of their message to consumers. And you should work with the people that are thinking about that all the time, not thinking about how do we spin BP's like 4% renewable investment into an ad campaign. Like it's a mismatch there between what the biggest, most interesting consumer-facing brands are doing and like what fossil fuels are doing. And I think we really want to like welcome people into that future. And there are names that we're going to name because there's some people with responsibility. But responsibility cuts both ways. It gives you like the power to actually make change as well. So I think it's a welcoming gesture as much as anything.
Yeah, you mentioned $26 million in one agency, and I think you said that's a year.
Yeah.
Is one particular client in oil and gas, and so I don't know the size of that agency. Sorry. But 26 million is a big chunk of change no matter what size you are. So I think now, we can talk a little bit about the strategic decisions that need to be made if you're going to say, you know what, 26 million of our revenue we're just going to turn away from it. We're just going to refuse that work going forward and kiss that money goodbye. What is that conversation like?
Yeah, I think this is why it's so important that like the project we're building has those three prongs, that like we actually are moving with clients to create that space. That agency is GSD&M. They work with the American Petroleum Institute, which is honestly, that 26 million is a lot, but there aren't that many other big industry associations that are spending that much money. API is kind of actually the gorilla in the room. They're actually the biggest of the bad, which puts more responsibility, I think, and impact with their decision to continue working with them. Like these are the people this is the industry associations who are the front line of defense for big oil, and always has been. But I think that's why actually this sort of collective work of we need to see clients step forward. We need to see, a lot of we're working with, big, I call them big green, but like big environmental NGOs to kind of make similar statements, and the foundations that work with them to make similar statements. And I think once you see that shift from clients and you see it also coming from creatives, I think it can shift upwards, because the reality is that, for GSD&M, they're here in Austin, Texas. It's a cool place. They have excellent ping pong tables in their office. And they do that because they need creatives. Like they're putting themselves here, they're building their offices the way they are because they need the smart people. They need the creative people. And I think if those creative people say, I actually don't want to do this anymore, they've spent just as much on their fancy office setting up to bring you in as they have earned from API. And so I think you have to look at both sides of that coin to make this work. There's a huge pool of money from consumer-facing brands that want us to prioritize sustainability and want to make space for that. I actually got an email yesterday from someone who's running a clean cars campaign that says, we've been looking for a PR agency for this new campaign and we can't find someone that doesn't have a conflict of interest. Can you help us? So that is like the barest trickle of the beginning of what I think will be a flood.
That's amazing.
And there's a question from Tim.
Yeah, a question from Tim. I've seen you nodding along. So do you want to come on, unmute your mic and ask your question?
Sure, yeah. So I think about industries that are like on the demand side, for example, like airlines, they consume a ton of fuel, fossil fuels. Are you thinking about targeting some of their agencies and the people in those agencies? Do you think that any of them might have the ability to influence some of their accounts, to say, hey, you might get better PR if you start investing at least a little bit and then promoting the fact that you've invested in, cleaner, energy sources for your planes or I don't know, like electric planes or something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I actually want to take half a step back and just explain sort of who is covered by our pledge, so that that's just 100% clear. So we actually wrote this out ahead of time because we knew this is like a big question that people have. So the people that we're trying to exclude are companies whose primary business is the extraction, processing, distribution, or sale of oil, gas, or coal. Utilities or electric cooperatives that generate more than 50% of their revenue or electricity from fossil fuels, trade associations or industry-funded nonprofit groups representing the interests of those same companies, or any new entity that is sort of meant to advance the message or goals that obscure or hide their financial contributions. So just to make it clear, it's like we're really focusing very squarely on the industry that is that extracts, burns, transports fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Or refines more specifically. And we're really not looking as much at like airline companies or car companies and things like that, because those companies do less to influence political outcomes. And like what we're doing, what we're really trying to get at here is that there is a massive establishment of old energy companies that are spending all this money somewhat to the purpose of influencing consumers. They want people to feel good about them in general, but really their primary goal is to influence political outcomes. And we think that that's the most dangerous part of this, that, without this like sort of flood of money and attempts to like influence public health or public decisions, it's probably much harder for the airline companies to get away with doing what they're doing. They won't have sort of the financial model to be able to continue pursuing what they're doing in the way they are. So it really is a specific kind of keystone of the arch of the fossil economy that we kind of need to knock out. And that's really where we are trying to head. And so in terms of influencing upwards, I really think so. I think that that's sort of the vision here. Like if BP wants to turn around and turn that 4% renewable energy investment and turn that upside down and make it 96% because they want better advertising and they want to like keep making money, like, yeah, I think that's great. I think it will take people pushing from all sides. And, if there's a world in which BP is like genuine about this, and I don't trust that they are right now, but if they are genuine and part of like what the pressure they receive is not just from creatives, but from investors, from insurance companies, from their lawyers, all these campaigns are happening. A bunch of Yale law students walked out of their classes to protest like the law school's connection to fossil fuel companies. I think this is a economy-wide transition that's developing. And I think being on the leading edge of it is really an advantage. And that's kind of where we want to push.
Thanks. Yeah, huge respect for what you guys have put together. I really appreciate how you're thinking about this. And it's a tremendous resource. I'm excited to dive in and share it with peers.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm please keep reaching out if you have questions or thoughts. And then we have Chris. I haven't had a chance to read it.
Yeah, I love the focus that Clean Creatives has, and the scope is very precise what you're trying to do, and that helps a lot. Yeah, Chris, would you like to come on and read your question? Hello.
Chris, yeah, Chris is still on. Okay.
may have stepped away. We can come back to you if you like. Margaret, would you like to come on and read your question?
Hi. Hi, Duncan.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Thank you for this talk. I think it's so, I was just actually just reading the New Yorker article. So yeah, my question is, I mean, I've been freelancing for a year now, and I guess the way I try to like approach clients, sometimes agencies, they don't even tell you like who you're working for. They would just say, hey, I'm looking for a designer animator. It's a super cool project. And then you would try to ask more questions like, well, who is the client? And like a lot of times, you know, they say like, oh, you need to sign an NDA. They don't give you too much information. So I feel like, I mean, that's some of the things that I've faced as a freelancer. But my main question is, do you have any tips or suggestions on spotting, you know, a client greenwashing?
Yeah, so it's really interesting what you're saying about the NDAs. It's actually not a layer of this that I really considered before. So I'm really grateful that you brought that up as just a way as something that we need to actively think about. I bet you can't disclose the NDA that you have. I was going to ask like what you might see when you talk to an agency about this, but yeah, I think that's a really important consideration and something that I think we're going to need to figure out. So thank you for freelancers in particular. So if you want to keep talking after this about just like if we can figure out how we want to answer this question, I'm sure it's going to keep coming up. So I want to have a good answer to that. You know, about the greenwashing, you know, we actually don't use that term anywhere on our site. And that was actually intentional because it is kind of vague. It is sort of like, okay, what's like, is this real? Is it not? Is it, and what we wanted to do is actually make this about the company and about the relationship you have with an industry. And I think this gets to Chris's question about like, okay, what is this company fundamentally trying to do to the world right now? Are they participating in is their primary purpose still to dig up and burn fossil fuels? And it's really about that purpose more so than trying to sort of parse like, okay, is this real? Is it not? Is it And we really want to make this about a relationship to the industry because greenwash is slippery. And there's some things people might consider greenwash that other people consider quite legitimate. And you know, when we sort of tried to draw as clear of a line as we could about like, okay, is your purpose as a company to dig up oil and burn it? You know, is this an electric company that is more than 50% of their generation is coming from fossils? Like, those are the kinds of lines we want to draw rather than saying this is greenwash, this is not, because that is like a harder line. And I also just want to point out that I think this is why I think what Sarah and Mark are doing is so great, is I think there are a lot of like analytical tools kind of built into this community to think about, okay, if I am working in this way that may feel like a greenwash, but like, here's how I can approach this with the most integrity and, you know, take the most out of it and build the most solution build solutions more deeply into it. You know, the thing about greenwashing is interesting because it shows that the company cares or recognize that other people care at least. And like, you know, there may be a way to use that as leverage. You know, I think kind of the answer here is in part just like stay in connection with like the community that can, like the climate designers community that can help like work through it. Not a super clean answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, this is really helpful. Thank you. I mean, it's really looking at, I guess, fundamentally what the company is, or at least like maybe the clients they work with, or I guess what they do specifically, if it's a lot of it is not like clean energy, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's always, you know, like 4% of BP's R&D budget is still a lot of money. So like, it's not like they're spending $0 on it, but in total, like their work to elevate that is what gives them legitimacy to keep doing all the bad stuff is kind of the answer. And it's like, you know, we know that after quadrupling their budget for renewable energy, BP is spending 4% of their budget on renewable research. And that's $500 million still. So it's a lot, but in context, it's not. And we know that 4%, way more than 4% of their advertising is renewable energy. So that's kind of the mismatch that I think we're trying to point out.
Yeah, I had a similar instance where a freelancer came to a meeting and just like while we were waiting for the meeting to start, said, you know, what do you think of corn ethanol? I think somebody had approached him about creating a video for corn ethanol, and you know, there's a similar example in Bill McKibben's article about algae biofuel and talking about low emission biofuels. And my general rule, like, I think overall there is this view of like, we have to be experts on this huge science problem to even be able to parse whether or not this thing is greenwashing or not, or if this thing is helpful or not, if this is beneficial or not. And I am not a scientist, I'm not an expert in science at all, but my basic understanding is anything that you are going to burn, any organic matter that you're going to burn to create energy is going to put carbon dioxide into the air. And the fossil fuels that we burn are super, super concentrated. And so they release a lot of carbon dioxides, and they produce a lot of energy. And so in order to create an equivalent amount of energy by burning something that's less concentrated, we would have to create a really large amount of it to even come close to burning fossil fuels. And so generally those low emissions biofuels are greenwashing just because they're like, look, we're investing time and energy into this low emission thing instead of oil and gas. And it's just not realistic. I don't have to be a science expert to say it's just not realistic. I don't know. Margot, do you want to, I don't think Emma is here. You mentioned Emma from Little Fox. We had her in for an event really early on in Climate Designer's life, and she does some really great stuff with only working with sustainable clients and educating clients on what kinds of things in climate science do we need to be aware of. And so it would be really great to have her here. But Margot, if you have any information, do you want to come in and contribute to the conversation?
I'll try. I have a really bad internet connection. So hopefully you can hear me. I'm taking her green graphic design course, and just to Margaret's point, having a client that might be or an agency client that's working with an oil company, if you had something like that built into your personal and say, oh, actually, even though this contract mentions like this list of kind of the naughty list clients. So it was just more of a food for thought kind of thing. But yes, her course is great for all kinds of tricks and tips for that stuff.
That's awesome. That's a great idea.
That's really cool. I mean, the answer to this is unfortunately very contextual and probably has a lot to do with like reputation and age and probably a lot of like gender and class stuff. There's like what you can kind of get away with, I think, is very contextual. But there are definitely agencies that will, like, if you say, I'm not going to work on this, they'll say, okay, fine. And like and that's in the context of like their full-time employees. Like we have spoken with people who are able to make that ask and kind of get it honored. I think the place that we're trying to get at is, I think this really points out the need for the kind of bottom-up approach to this, that if there's like a norm that says like, this is an acceptable thing to ask, this is something that like you can say no to, in the same way that a lot of people say no to tobacco, that's the place that I think we want to get. And I think it just takes a lot of people and a lot of people kind of raising their voice together. And that's why we wanted to build a platform for organizing and connecting with people, rather than just kind of expecting individuals to kind of get away with it themselves, because then you can divide and conquer and whack-a-mole, and it's kind of a way to manage the crisis, or to manage the the question for agencies that are working with fossil fuel companies to sort of make it your problem rather than a social problem or a problem they have across the industry. And I think, yeah, like what the viability of making that ask right now is, I think right now tenuous for a lot of people, to be frank. But I think the more people that we can kind of build capacity with and build collaboration, collaborate with and raise our voices together, that's, I think, the point at which it starts to shift and where it's like, okay, that's fine. And just an anecdote, you know, when we were working on this campaign over the summer and just kind of trying to get it together, my co-founder Jamie came across a Philip Morris ad. And when he sent it to me, I thought it was parody. Like I thought it was a joke because it was just so bad. And you know, it was like, oh, we want to be the smoke-free future. It's like, and it looked like something out of The Onion. Like it was horrible. And I think that that's because there is that norm that like people who are good at what they do, and people acknowledge that they're good at what they do, they're not going to work on tobacco. And you only get kind of the dregs who are still willing to be like, hell yeah, I'll take Philip Morris's money. And I think the impact can be seen about when that becomes a social norm, the amount of impact they're able to have on influencing public outcomes.
Those are some really great points. I think that there's a really great point that you made in there that I just want to call out again so that we can all internalize it in response to what Margaret asked. If somebody comes to you to say, can you work on a project, just like normalizing asking, you know, does this contribute to global warming, or, you know, is this a fossil fuel company, or having a list of questions that you just ask. And maybe they'd say they don't know, but the fact that you asked the question will bring it up to them that, oh, maybe they need to disclose this information or think about this. That in itself alone is just a change, right?
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I guess.
Oh, I just wanted to add on, like, I guess like designers and whoever who helps out on these campaigns, I just feel like agencies, maybe they should, I guess, treat the designers more. I mean, we're not just here to do the job and make the money. It's like, why is it not fine for us to ask, you know, like that we care about the work that we're doing and who are we working for? Like that's just something I feel like could be like a basic question that they should be able to answer without going through, you know, all the steps and signing agreements and everything. So, but I've been able, yeah, yeah. But I feel like that's also the reason why I haven't been taking on some of the clients that are like, oh, you know, we can't just, you know, disclose that information yet. I'm like, okay, then. But I feel like there are some clients that are more open to it. And if I know who I'm working for, then the creatives are more willing to, you know, just they have more information to work off of and know who they want to work with. So, yeah, but to your point, Sarah, I would love to kind of brainstorm the list of questions that we could, you know, ask these agencies. Yeah.
Yeah, let's get Emma in here to teach us what she does.
I know, yeah.
Right?
Emma's awesome.
Oh my gosh, that's so cool. What was I gonna say? Oh, yeah. I really want to get us in this place where as creatives, we acknowledge that we have power to say no. And out of the place where we think we have to say yes to every single client project that comes our way, especially when we're a smaller studio or freelancing. I am right there with you. I have been there where it feels like the good projects are few and far between, and you have the feast or famine type of situation, and you just have to say no. I mean, you just have to say yes to every single thing that comes your way because you're desperate. And the fact of the matter is the skills that we have are in high demand. And we need to start acknowledging that and only give those skills to, you know, we have standards, right? So I really love what Clean Creatives is doing for that as well. Chris Sherwin, are you back? I want to call you back up to ask your question before we...
I'm back.
Cool.
I thought I'd hit you guys with my English accent. How's that?
I love it. I love it.
That's
James Bond. So great to join you from London. Yeah, my question. So I signed up to something equivalent to what you were doing. I think in 2017, we've got a kind of, what's it called? I think it's called Considered Creatives or Climate Creatives Pledge. Yeah. And the next project that came in, I do product and packaging design work rather than kind of communications. The next pitch that came in was from a large oil and gas industry to work on a sustainable packaging project. And I felt quite good about turning it down. I didn't do that work and haven't done any of that work since. Sort of in parallel to that, what I observed is, and this is coming to my question now, we've got over in Europe, there's a really interesting Danish oil and gas company called Dong Energy. And they've sort of, I mean, they've done the traditional sort of, we're rebranding as a renewables company. And I would imagine there's a fairly large project in there somewhere for, you know, a PR and comms and ad agency to rebrand them. But I think the upshot of all of that is that they look quite serious, right? And, you know, they're doing genuinely interesting work. They're transforming their portfolio. You know, they've got a target to be 2025. I think it's net carbon neutral and then have no emissions by 2040. And actually, you know, to my quite large surprise, they look like an organization that is serious about this. And that raises the question, right, of, you know, that as creatives, if we completely disengage from the fossil fuels industry, we sort of cut off the possibility that they are capable of changing. You know, and I don't think that, you know, they're not all like that, right? Let's be realistic about this. But I just wanted to raise that sort of question to you of, you know, kind of if we disengage and say no, do we completely close off the possibility that large organizations, for instance, are capable of changing?
Yeah, I mean, that is an exceptionally ambitious target from them that is like leaps and bounds ahead of any other oil company I've ever heard of. Yeah. And so it could be that there's a limited exception to what to the rule here. And, you know, I think it's like, you know, our attitude towards this, I think, should be, it's not that, oh, have you ever drilled up oil and therefore like, verboten, right? Like, you know, I live in Texas. I know people who own oil wells, you know, like it's, you know, it's not like they're cast out. I think we really want to be realistic about it though, and recognize like, okay, as you pointed out, there's like external verification of these goals. The numbers are extremely strong. The investments are extremely strong. I don't know if this company, you said they're now called Ørsted. This is why it's rebranding from Dong, I think, on several levels. But you know, like there's ways to verify that and get a sense of that I think you can apply. And yeah, like I said, like the whole the mission here is actually kind of calling people in and calling people into the future. And I think we don't want to have the attitude that like you can never, you know, you're marked by sin forever. I think we want to, you know, if there's like really great external verification of that, then awesome. I think the situation we want to avoid is where there's a mismatch between the public message and the money and the actual practical investments. And that's the place where it becomes dangerous. And I think we do want to be mindful that even in situations where, you know, Exxon has their algae program, which they've been working on since 2009, and not a single drop has made it to the pumps. It feels like a lot of money, right? Like they've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in it, but in the context of their overall spending is minuscule. It's not meaningful at all. So I think the place where you have to be aware is, you know, what is the fundamental purpose of this company? What are they actually trying to get at? Is there any sort of external third-party understanding of like what their goals are that can lead you in to understand what they're actually trying to do here? I don't think there's any objection to a company making a meaningful transformation and being a part of that. But there are far more examples of not meaningful transformations that I think just need to still probably be the center of the conversation because the impact is just huge.
Yeah, I think that's why I really appreciate Duncan's that campaign's focus on exactly the scope of what you're trying to do and you're not trying to be like cancel culture and just cancel anyone who's ever touched oil, because oil is bad, and like reduce it to those really simple and emotional, outrageous, reactionary things. It's like, no, we have some specific goals that we want to do. We want to stop putting fossil fuel emissions into the atmosphere, and we want to remove the ones that are already there. I think that's what it comes down to, and we have to do that immediately, as soon as possible. And so if you're on board with that, great, let's work together. And if you have a vested interest in continuing to emit fossil fuel emissions, we can't work together.
Yeah. Sarah, do you have a puppy?
Yes, and he is whining, and I don't know why. I'm so sorry.
I mean, I think this is a puppy. I don't know.
He's actually a really old dog, and it's old and sick, and it's a whole long story.
Okay, all right.
Anyway,
Yeah.
Catrielle, would you like to come on screen and ask your question?
I was wondering what that sound was too. I was like, it sounds adorable, but also sad.
It is exactly that, adorable and sad.
Hey, Duncan. I was wondering what you might say to, like the young, like upcoming creatives who like maybe are just graduating college or graduate college in a few years and like are feeling super pressured to just like find any job. And I think a lot of schools also are just kind of like get a job at XYZ company that's like super well known, who might also be well known for, just scooping up the young creatives who won't ask questions and will do what they're told because that's what you do for a few years. So I don't know, like what would you say to them to like convince them that they can do it too? Or tips, because it is hard, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we have the full answer to this. And I think, this is why I'm so excited. I like these conversations, is like what I'd like to know your answer on some level, not to put it back on you, but I think the thing I will say is that, both the fossil fuel industry and the PR advertising companies are two industries that are obsessed with youth and obsessed with the idea of the threat that the next generation poses to their business models. And I think there's actually a uniquely powerful role that young people can potentially have in that context. WPP, massive conglomerate, they put together a special brainstorm shop for BP recently, because BP was forced to rebrand again, where they brought everybody from across WPP. Ogilvy is the big sort of holds the BP account, but they brought people from everywhere to get together and talk about like, what are we going to do? And their takeaway was they were looking at the global climate strikes and they're like, we need to figure out how to get the people that Greta speaks to care about BP. And that like the younger next generation, I think really worries oil companies. They really worry advertising companies in the same way that we know a lot of the old marketing tactics don't work. We know that young people have access to huge amounts of media that's like authentic, and this is why we have an influencer economy now and all this stuff. So my feeling is that I think young people actually have more power in some ways in this conversation that I think we want to give voice to that. And I don't think there's an answer to like what that looks like just yet. But I'm trying to start to outreach to advertising schools, Miami Design School, things like that, and actually say like, okay, the young people here, their values don't align with Exxon's, on a fundamental level. Like they don't anymore. That's not where the next generation is at. It's not where Gen Z is at. So like, what can we do to have that be visible and have that be a starting point for a conversation about what work they're going to do? And it's just like one of the things we haven't fully fleshed out yet, but I think is really rich and really valuable. I've done a lot of work with Sunrise Movement in the US, and the way they're speaking to their generation, I think will create a culture shift. And I think we just need to find a way to visualize that and to make it concrete. And we're not there yet. I don't think that an individual could just like kind of stick their hand up and be like, no, and like expect everything to go swimmingly just yet. But I think if 10 or 100 people do, it's a different story. And I think that's where we need to get. And yeah, Mark was saying that as an educator, like he resonates with that. And I think educators will play a really key role in this too. So yeah, TBD, but my feeling is there's real power there actually. And there's vulnerability, of course, like everybody has debt now, which is absurd. But I think there's also a unique source of power.
Awesome. Chris, you have about 3 minutes if you want to add on to that.
Oh, I better be really quick. So quite a lot we quite a lot of what we talked about, I think, has been about reputational risk in society with consumers. But so in my world, so I mean, in truth, 80% of what I do tends to be with larger, kind of corporate clients. But I'm lucky enough, maybe 10 to 20% of the time, to work with, these new kind of clean and green tech startups. Where I might get to work on a new piece of product design with them. And they're exactly the sort of businesses that we want to elevate, kind of to grow as part of a future sustainable economy. And the point about, working with, for instance, oil and gas or big, whatever kind of climate corporates is, those guys, don't want you to, they don't want those clients on your roster. Right. And in a sense, they're going to turn you down if you're working with BP or Exxon or Shell, because it's a reputational risk. And there's, kind of, if you're a creative, there's a sort of value alignment between you and, a small sustainability driven startup. And yeah, I suppose I just wanted to underscore that there's not the reasons to say this is not only ethical, there might actually be an opportunity cost for you, that it actually risks you working with some hotshot startup further down the line that just doesn't rate you because you worked with Shell or BP or Exxon.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I mean, I think there are those companies, and I think there's going to be a growing number of them, and we're going to do our best to encourage them to speak up. But also there's a reputational risk because climate litigation is becoming a bigger picture of the landscape here. And Massachusetts Attorney General, essentially the cornerstone of their lawsuit against Exxon is Exxon's advertising. And it's the centerpiece. And we know that there are senators and members of Congress who are launching investigations about this soon. There are significant brand risks, personally and otherwise. I don't think anyone's necessarily going to go to jail per se, but do you want your company in front of Congress, like talking to members of Congress about this? Probably not. So maybe take that step now. So yeah, I really think that risks are big, and I want to elevate them in a way that doesn't feel kind of like blackmail-y, but I think they're real. And this is part of the calling in. It's like, yeah, you should know what the risks are, and you should do what you can now to mitigate that risk.
I love that perspective shift. It's less about the risk of losing money if you don't take this work, and more about the risk of facing the consequences if you do.
Yeah.
Wow.
And some of it is speculative, and some of the fossil fuel money is there now, but there's also those risks are emerging, and I think they're going to become more and more pointed.
That's incredible. This whole hour has been really incredible to talk to you. Thank you, Duncan.
Yeah, I'm just going to put my email in the chat.
Please do. And I think you are also on the online community. If people want to keep this discussion going publicly, asynchronously, I would totally love that.
Yep.
That would be really cool. And yeah, feel free to reach out to Duncan. Thank you for making yourself available like that.
Thank you all. I'm really grateful for the chance to talk. And if you have thoughts or questions or just things that occurred to you that you didn't get it sort of raised in the conversation, please just send them my way. I'm very happy to talk about this more. Amazing.
Thank you. And I just want to remind everybody that tomorrow is the third Saturday of the month, and we have a global meetup every third Saturday of the month. So I hope that we can see many of you there. Yeah. And with that, I will say thank you for being here. Happy Friday, and have a great weekend.
Happy Friday. Thank you all.